The first slap echoed off the Venetian plaster, silencing 200 Austin elites in the ballroom. Before I could taste the blood, a second slap landed, fueled by the kind of generational arrogance that thinks wealth buys the right to assault. I did not cry, and I did not scream. Instead, I looked into the furious eyes of my future mother-in-law and calculated exactly how many minutes it would take to dismantle her entire empire. Hello to the wonderful audience of Violet Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep these stories coming. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our incredible staff can pay their living expenses and continue creating the content you love, which you can do by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the donation link in the description or pinned comment below. My name is Serenity Diaz, and this is exactly how my fairy tale engagement shattered into a million pieces. The evening air in Westlake Hills, Texas, was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and expensive perfume. The estate sprawled across manicured hills, a fortress of limestone and glass built by generations of old Texas oil money. It was meant to be the happiest night of my life. I was celebrating my engagement to Julian Vance, a dashing venture capitalist whose family practically owned half the state. Crystal chandeliers hung from the temporary pavilion erected on the sweeping lawns, casting a golden, romantic glow over the 200 elites gathered to toast our union. Waiters drifted through the crowd carrying silver trays of vintage champagne, and a string quartet played softly in the background. It was a scene ripped straight from a cinematic masterpiece, flawlessly designed to showcase the Vance family's immense wealth and social dominance. Julian stood by my side, flashing his signature charismatic smile, shaking hands with senators, oil barons, and tech magnates. I wore a custom silk gown that felt like a second skin, holding a champagne flute, trying to ignore the persistent knot of anxiety in my stomach. That knot was inextricably tied to Eleanor Vance. Julian's mother was a towering figure of aristocratic terror. She wore her diamonds like armor and her pedigree like a weapon. The toasts had just begun. The best man had raised his glass, preparing to deliver a speech about love and destiny, when Eleanor suddenly materialized beside me. Her fingers, cold and hard like iron talons, clamped down on my wrist. She did not whisper. She did not politely ask for a private word. With a sudden, vicious yank, she pulled me away from Julian and dragged me directly into the center of the polished dance floor. The string quartet faltered and ground to a chaotic halt. Conversations died instantly. The clinking of glasses ceased. "Stop this charade right now!" Eleanor screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the Venetian plaster walls of the adjacent main house. "I will not let my son marry a common criminal." Julian stepped forward, his face pale with confusion. "Mother, what are you doing?" She ignored him completely. Her furious eyes locked onto mine. "You are nothing but a corporate con artist. You think I do not know? You are using your pathetic little business as a front to siphon the Vance family trust. You are a parasite." Before I could process the sheer absurdity of her words, before I could even open my mouth to defend myself, her hand swung backward. The first slap sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. My head snapped to the side. A sharp sting blossomed across my left cheek. I tasted copper as my teeth cut into the inside of my lip. But Eleanor was not finished, fueled by the kind of generational arrogance that truly believes wealth buys the right to assault anyone beneath their tax bracket. She struck again. The second slap landed harder than the first. The massive emerald-cut diamond ring on her middle finger dragged across my cheek, slicing the skin just below my cheekbone. A collective gasp rippled through the 200 guests. The room plunged into a dead, suffocating silence. Not a single person stepped forward. Julian stood completely frozen in his tracks, his mouth slightly open, doing absolutely nothing to protect his fiancée. I could hear the faint rustle of silk and the quiet clicking of camera lenses. Guests were instinctively pulling out their phones, holding them up, recording every agonizing second. They were waiting for the breakdown, They wanted to capture the exact moment the fake socialite cracked, burst into tears, and fled into the dark night in absolute disgrace. But the tears never came. Instead of panicking, an eerie, freezing calm washed over my entire body. My heartbeat, which had been racing a moment before, slowed to a steady, rhythmic thud. The humiliation evaporated, replaced by a cold, hyper-rational clarity. I slowly turned my head back to face Eleanor. Her chest was heaving, her eyes wild with vindictive triumph. I reached up with steady fingers and wiped a single drop of warm blood from my jawline. I looked at the red stain on my skin, then looked directly into Eleanor's eyes. I did not scream. I did not defend myself. I turned my back on her, turned my back on Julian, and turned my back on the entire crowd without uttering a single word. My heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as I walked away from the pavilion and straight into the estate's main house. I knew exactly where I was going. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the private library, stepped inside, and pushed the brass locks into place until they clicked shut. The muffled noise of the party was immediately cut off. I was alone in the quiet, dimly lit room. Now, it was time to make the phone calls that would burn Eleanor Vance's entire world to the ground. The heavy mahogany doors of the library offered a solid, grounding barrier against the superficial world I had foolishly tried to merge with. Standing in the dim light, surrounded by leather-bound first editions that had likely never been read, the adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a cold and cynical clarity. How did I get here? The answer was a bitter pill to swallow. I had built a fortress around my digital life, but I had left the front door to my heart wide open to a family that despised my very existence. I am 32 years old, the daughter of hardworking immigrants, a first-generation Latina who clawed her way up from nothing to build Aegis Nexus Solutions. My company is not some flashy tech startup burning through venture capital. We operate entirely in the shadows, providing highly classified cybersecurity and threat mitigation for high-net-worth individuals, global corporations, and occasionally, government contractors. We handle digital kidnappings, corporate espionage, and network breaches that could topple entire economies. I built an empire on paranoia and absolute control, yet I somehow failed to see the most obvious threat standing right in front of me. When I first met Julian, he seemed like an anomaly. He was charming, undeniably handsome, and carried his immense generational wealth with a casual grace that made him appear distinct from his snobbish upbringing. He did not boast about his trust fund or the Texas oil wells that bore his family name. Instead, he asked about my passions, listened intently when I spoke, and promised me a partnership of true equals. He painted a picture of a modern, grounded life together, far removed from the suffocating traditions of his lineage. Like an amateur, I bought into the illusion. Over the past 12 months, that illusion slowly eroded, chipped away by the relentless, passive-aggressive microaggressions of his mother. Eleanor Vance was a master of the aristocratic insult, delivering devastating blows with a perfectly polite smile. She never missed an opportunity to remind me that I was an outsider, a commoner trying to infiltrate their bloodline. She would host lavish luncheons and introduce me to her society friends with a patronizing pat on the arm. "Serenity runs an adorable little IT help desk," she would say, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "She fixes computers. Isn't that just precious?" She constantly questioned my pedigree, asking invasive questions about my parents, our neighborhood, and my education, always managing to express mock surprise when I articulated myself well. I endured the condescension because I thought it was the price of admission to Julian's world. But my biggest mistake was not my silence. It was my secrecy. I kept the true scale and immense power of Aegis Nexus Solutions completely hidden from the Vance family. I wanted to keep my work and personal life strictly separated. I did not want Eleanor's invasive eyes scrutinizing my client list or my net worth. I deliberately downplayed my success, allowing them to believe I was exactly what Eleanor claimed I was, a small-time tech girl barely making ends meet. I thought I was protecting my business, but in reality, I was handing Eleanor the ammunition she needed to build a narrative of me as a gold-digging opportunist. That decision to remain in the shadows created a massive vulnerability, one that was ruthlessly exploited because of a seemingly minor incident that occurred exactly 3 weeks ago. My former co-founder, Marcus Thorne, was a brilliant coder, but a fundamentally toxic human being. His greed had begun to overshadow his talent. Through routine internal audits, I caught him attempting to cut highly illegal side deals with shadowy data brokers, planning to sell backdoor access to some of our most vulnerable clients. I did not hesitate. I cornered him in the boardroom, presented the undeniable digital forensics, and forced a hostile buyout of his shares. I kicked him out of the company and blacklisted him across the industry. I thought the cancer had been excised. I thought the threat was neutralized. I was wrong. I was so focused on securing my professional networks that I ignored the glaring vulnerabilities in my own personal life. The most damning realization was not Marcus's betrayal, but Julian's complicity. Looking back at the past year, the red flags were everywhere, waving violently in the warm Texas wind. Every single time Eleanor threw a veiled insult my way, every time she belittled my heritage or my career, Julian did absolutely nothing. He would look away, take a sip of his expensive wine, and later whisper empty apologies in my ear, begging me to just keep the peace. His passivity was a deliberate choice. He chose his comfort over my dignity. I had blinded myself with the illusion of love, ignoring the harsh reality that Julian was never going to be my partner. He was always going to be Eleanor's obedient son. Now, trapped in this gilded cage of a library, the illusion was completely shattered. The time for keeping the peace was officially over. I pulled my heavily encrypted laptop from the hidden compartment of my overnight bag, which I had stashed behind a leather armchair earlier that evening. The heavy mahogany doors were dead-bolted, shutting out the faint, rhythmic bass of the string quartet outside. I sat at the massive antique desk, letting the cool wood ground my racing thoughts. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a fraction of a second before flying across the keys. A biometric scan, and 3 layers of authentication later. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh blue glow across the dusty spines of unread classics. My mind shifted from the physical sting on my cheek to the cold, unforgiving logic of code. I bypassed the standard security gateways and accessed the backdoor network monitors of Aegis Nexus Solutions. I needed to understand exactly how Eleanor had arrived at the conclusion that I was a corporate con artist. She was arrogant, but she was not inherently imaginative. Someone had fed her a narrative, and I was going to find out exactly who and how. I initiated a deep dive into the Vance family network, a system I had been quietly monitoring and protecting for 6 months as a personal favor to the man I thought I was going to marry. The server logs cascaded down my screen in streams of green text. It took me less than 10 minutes to isolate a glaring anomaly, a digital footprint that felt sickeningly familiar. The coding signature was sloppy in a very specific, arrogant way. It belonged to Marcus Thorne. I pulled up the communication logs and pieced together the timeline. Exactly 1 week ago, Marcus, still burning with the humiliation of his forced exit from my company, had bypassed Eleanor's primary security screener. He had sent an encrypted email directly to her private server, using a subject line meticulously designed to trigger her deepest paranoias regarding the family fortune. I decrypted the attachments he had sent her. A cold laugh caught in my throat as the files opened. Marcus had fabricated an entire portfolio of financial ruin. There were falsified bank statements showing my personal accounts completely overdrawn, heavily forged profit and loss sheets, declaring Aegis Nexus Solutions bankrupt, and the masterpiece of his deception, heavily redacted, spoofed federal subpoenas. He had constructed a meticulous lie, presenting digital paperwork that made it look as though I was currently under active investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for wire fraud. The narrative Marcus sold her was brilliantly tailored to her prejudices. He convinced Eleanor that I was utterly broke, facing federal prison, and plotting to marry Julian solely to drain the Vance offshore accounts the moment the ink dried on our marriage certificate. Eleanor, blinded by her inherent disdain for me, did not hire an independent forensic accountant to verify the documents. Her confirmation bias swallowed the bait whole. She saw exactly what she wanted to see. But as I dug deeper into the metadata of that initial exchange, the narrative of a simple, bitter revenge plot began to unravel. Marcus was petty, but he was also incredibly greedy. Ruining my engagement did not pay his bills. My eyes scanned the packet headers, hunting for the catch. There it was. A massive spike in a network traffic localized entirely on Eleanor's personal devices, originating from a physical location just outside the Vance estate, dated 4 days ago. Marcus did not just send her an email, he had arranged a clandestine, in-person meeting. I accessed the microphone and camera activation logs on Eleanor's tablet. I could see the exact moment Marcus had socially engineered his way into her inner sanctum. He had likely sat across from her, wearing a cheap suit, feigning deep concern for her son. Under the guise of showing her the undeniable digital evidence of my supposed crimes, he had convinced her to connect his flash drive directly into her device, bypassing the estate's external firewalls entirely. The twisted reality of his plan bloomed across my screen in real time. The fabricated documents and the character assassination were nothing more than a smokescreen. Marcus's lie was not about ruining a wedding. It was a calculated distraction designed to mask a massive, highly sophisticated malware injection. I traced the payload's current trajectory. The malicious code had quietly migrated from Eleanor's tablet directly into the central servers of the Vance family primary holding company. It had spent the last 96 hours mapping their financial architecture, locating the offshore accounts, and disabling the internal alert systems. My fingers froze over the trackpad as the final piece of the puzzle snapped into place. A series of active, unauthorized execution commands began flashing red in the corner of my terminal. The hack was not a past event. It was happening right now, at this exact second. While Eleanor was busy orchestrating a public spectacle, while she was screaming at me on the dance floor and striking me across the face, Marcus was initiating the final extraction sequence. A chilling, deeply satisfying realization washed over me. Eleanor Vance, in all her boundless generational arrogance, had just publicly assaulted the only cybersecurity expert on the planet equipped to stop the devastating financial heist that was actively liquidating her empire. She had burned her own house down, and she did not even smell the smoke yet. I reached for my phone, my hand completely steady. The time for shock had passed, replaced by the mechanical precision of a wartime general. I pulled up my encrypted contacts and bypassed the standard security protocols to dial my older brother directly. Mateo was not just family. He was a ruthless United States attorney for the Western District of Texas. He possessed a terrifying intellect and a courtroom demeanor that regularly made seasoned corporate lawyers sweat through their expensive suits. As fate would have it, he was already in downtown Austin attending a high-level federal cybersecurity conference. He answered on the second ring. "Mateo, I need you at the Vance estate in Westlake Hills immediately," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am on my way. What is the situation?" he replied, his tone instantly shifting from casual sibling warmth to icy professional alert. He did not ask if I was okay. He knew my tone meant something catastrophic had just occurred. "Eleanor Vance just publicly assaulted me in front of 200 guests. I am pressing formal charges for assault and battery. I also need federal presence. We have an active, massive wire fraud situation unfolding on their servers right now, and I am legally severing my firm from their network. Bring badges. I am leaving the hotel now. I will be at the gates in under 20 minutes. Do not say another word to anyone until I arrive," Mateo instructed, disconnecting the line. I immediately dialed my second number. It connected directly to the underground command center of Aegis Nexus Solutions. My lead incident response director picked up instantly. "David, we are initiating a code black protocol on all Vance Holding Corporation accounts, effective this exact second," I commanded. A code black was our nuclear option. It meant an immediate, hard severance of all protective Overwatch services. It ordered my team to instantly retract our proprietary firewalls, scrub our digital fingerprints from the client servers, and erect an impenetrable legal barrier between my company and the burning wreckage of their network. I was legally and technically walling off Aegis Nexus solutions from the Vance family. Understood. Initiating total severance. Are you compromised, boss? David asked, the sound of furious typing already echoing in the background. No, but the client has initiated a hostile breach of contract via physical assault. Lock us out. David, let them burn. Locking out now. Stay safe. With the digital perimeter secured, I turned my attention back to my laptop. I opened a blank legal template and began drafting an emergency termination notice. My fingers hammered against the keys with lethal intent. I formally documented the immediate cessation of all cybersecurity and protective Overwatch services for Vance Holding Corporation. Under the clause for termination, I explicitly cited unprovoked physical assault and hostile breach of contract by the primary client, Eleanor Vance. I was methodically stripping away the invisible, military-grade armor I had silently provided them for the past 6 months. Just as I finished proofreading the document, the heavy brass handle of the library door rattled. A loud click echoed through the room. Julian had found a master key. He stumbled into the library, his tuxedo slightly rumpled, his face a pathetic mask of panic and regret. "Serenity, please," Julian begged, his voice trembling as he stepped toward the desk. "You have to listen to me. My mother is just stressed about the merger. It was a massive misunderstanding. She did not mean to go that far. Please, let us just go back out there and smooth this over." I did not even blink. I did not look up from my screen. I treated him exactly like the insignificant background noise he had proven himself to be. I hit the execute command on my laptop. Across the room, the estate wireless printer sitting on an ornate mahogany credenza whirred to life. The machine hummed, spitting out the crisp, white pages of my termination notice, followed immediately by the undeniable, hard copy proof of Marcus Thorne and his fabricated dossier. "Serenity, please look at me," Julian pleaded, reaching out to touch my arm. I stood up abruptly, stepping out of his reach. I walked over to the printer, collected the warm pages, and neatly aligned them into a stark, devastating portfolio of ruin. Through the thick glass windows of the library, the rhythmic flashing of red and blue lights sliced through the darkness of the manicured lawns. Matteo had promised 20 minutes, but he arrived in 15. I watched as 2 massive black utility vehicles slammed to a halt directly in front of the valet station. Matteo stepped out, wearing a sharply tailored dark suit, his face set in a furious, unforgiving scowl. Flanking him were 2 armed federal investigators, their gold shields gleaming against their tactical vests. They did not wait for an invitation. They completely ignored the bewildered valet attendants and the protesting private security guards. The trio marched straight up the grand stone steps and pushed through the main entrance, bringing an overwhelming, undeniable force of federal authority directly into the heart of the extravagant celebration. I could hear the immediate disruption spreading through the house. The frantic attempts of the event coordinators to return the party to normal were instantly shattered by the authoritative shouts of federal agents commanding everyone to clear the hallways. I walked out of the library, leaving Julian standing alone in the suffocating silence of his own making. I met Matteo in the grand foyer. He took one look at the red mark on my cheek, and his jaw locked in a silent promise of absolute destruction. Flanked by my older brother and the 2 armed investigators, I turned my gaze toward the main ballroom. I held the freshly printed termination of services in my left hand and the absolute proof of the frame job in my right. It was time to return to the party. I marched back into the main ballroom, flanked on either side by Matteo and the 2 armed federal investigators. The string quartet had long since packed away their instruments. The 200 guests were clustered in tight, whispering groups, their eyes wide with a mixture of scandalized thrill and genuine fear as the heavy mahogany doors swung open. The sea of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos parted instantly, creating a wide, unobstructed path directly to the center of the room where Eleanor Vance stood. She had a fresh glass of champagne in her hand, holding court with a few of her closest society confidants, pretending the violent outburst from earlier was nothing more than a minor, distasteful disruption caused by someone beneath her station. Her fake, perfectly composed smile faltered the second she saw the heavy gold shields gleaming on the tactical vests of the men walking beside me. The murmurs died down instantly. The silence in the room was so absolute and heavy, I could hear the ice clinking in the glasses of the terrified guests standing 10 feet away. Matteo did not waste a single breath on pleasantries or social decorum. He stepped directly into Eleanor's personal space, his towering frame casting a long, imposing shadow over her petite, diamond-draped figure. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick stack of folded legal documents. He pressed them firmly against her chest, until her natural reflex forced her to raise her hands and take them. "Eleanor Vance," Matteo's voice boomed, carrying effortlessly across the cavernous room like thunder. "You are hereby served with an emergency restraining order. Furthermore, you are officially on notice of a pending civil suit for unprovoked physical assault, battery, and public defamation. If you so much as breathe in the direction of my sister again, if you attempt to contact her through any medium, I will personally ensure you spend the next 72 hours in a federal holding cell without the possibility of bail." Eleanor's jaw dropped. The champagne flute in her hand trembled uncontrollably, spilling a few drops of vintage golden liquid onto the pristine marble floor. She looked around the room, desperate for someone, anyone, to step forward and intervene on her behalf. But the Austin elites were suddenly very interested in the toes of their expensive leather shoes. No one dared to challenge a United States attorney flanked by armed federal agents. Before she could recover her aristocratic composure, I stepped forward and slammed the printed dossier directly on top of the restraining order in her hands. "You called me a corporate con artist in front of 200 people," I said, my voice cold, steady, and amplified by the sheer acoustics of the silent ballroom. "You claimed I was draining your family trust. You based your entire public temper tantrum on these documents given to you by a man you met in secret exactly 4 days ago at a coffee shop downtown." Eleanor's eyes darted frantically toward the printed pages, recognizing the files she thought were her secret weapon. "These are official bank records," she hissed, though her voice severely lacked its previous venom. "They are federal subpoenas proving your guilt." "They are poorly executed forgeries," I countered, leaning in slightly, ensuring every single guest heard my next words loud and clear. "They are entirely fabricated digital garbage created by Marcus Thorne, a disgraced hacker I fired from my company 3 weeks ago for attempted corporate espionage. You did not hire an independent forensic auditor. You did not consult your own high-priced legal team. You let a bitter, unemployed coder manipulate you into turning your own engagement party into a crime scene because his fake narrative perfectly matched your pathetic, deep-seated prejudice against me. You were conned, Eleanor, easily and completely." "Serenity, please. You need to lower your voice," Julian pleaded, suddenly appearing at my side out of the crowd. He looked frantic, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "We can handle this privately. Let us just go to the study. Please, for me. We can fix this." I slowly turned my head and looked at Julian. I looked at the man who had stood perfectly still, holding a drink, while his mother slapped me twice across the face. His failure to defend me in that crucial moment had sealed his fate forever. He was not a partner. He was a coward draped in expensive fabric, entirely dependent on his mother's approval. I reached for my left hand. I slid the massive, flawless diamond engagement ring off my finger. Julian was holding a half-empty glass of champagne. Without breaking eye contact with him, I held the ring directly over his glass and simply let it go. The heavy diamond dropped into the liquid with a quiet splash, sinking straight to the bottom and resting among the rising bubbles. "There is no us, Julian," I said, my tone completely devoid of anger, sorrow, or any lingering affection. There is only you and the mother you are so terrified of. I pivoted away from him, returning my undivided attention to the matriarch of the Vance Empire. The guests were leaning in, holding their collective breath, completely captivated by the public destruction of the family they had worshipped and feared for decades. For the past 6 months, I announced clearly, letting my voice ring out to the furthest corners of the room, I have been the Chief Executive Officer of Aegis Nexus Solutions. We do not run an IT help desk. We handle classified threat mitigation and digital warfare for entities whose net worth makes your family trust look like a children's weekly allowance. And for the past 6 months, out of a severely misplaced sense of love for your son, I have been secretly providing pro bono, military-grade cybersecurity overwatch for the entire Vance Holding Corporation. A collective, shocked murmur rippled through the crowd, the oil barons and venture capitalists in the room. Men who understood the terrifying reality of cyber warfare suddenly grasped the true magnitude of what I was saying. Because of your unprovoked physical assault tonight, I continued, holding up the final printed document detailing the network severance. That protection is legally and permanently terminated, effective immediately. My firm has completely severed all ties to your servers. We have removed our firewalls. You are entirely on your own. Eleanor scoffed, a harsh, desperate sound echoing in her throat. She straightened her spine, clutching her diamonds with white knuckles, desperately trying to glue the shattered pieces of her towering ego back together. She plastered a condescending sneer across her face, refusing to accept defeat. "Oh, please," Eleanor mocked, her voice dripping with the absolute last remnants of her dying pride. "Do you truly expect me to tremble? We are the Vance family. We have the best corporate lawyers in the entire state of Texas. We certainly do not need a glorified tech support girl to keep our money safe." I stood perfectly still, letting the heavy, suffocating silence of the ballroom stretch out. I did not need to argue with a woman whose reality was about to violently fracture. I just needed to wait. I watched the last remnants of Eleanor's pride masquerade as invincible strength. She genuinely believed her inherited wealth provided an impenetrable shield against the consequences of her own ignorance. It took exactly 3 minutes. The absolute quiet was abruptly shattered by a sharp, aggressive buzzing emanating from the diamond-encrusted clutch in Eleanor's hand. It was a high-priority fraud alert, designed to bypass all silent modes. Before she could even unzip the small bag with her trembling fingers, Julian's phone began to vibrate violently in his tuxedo pocket, playing a customized emergency ringtone that echoed awkwardly over the anxious murmurs of the crowd. Then, from the far corner of the room, near the towering ice sculptures, a voice erupted. It was Arthur Pendleton, the chief financial officer of the Vance Holding Corporation. He dropped his crystal glass of expensive scotch. It shattered against the polished marble floor, sending shards and amber liquid flying. But nobody looked at the mess. Every single guest was staring at Arthur, whose face had instantly drained of all color, leaving him looking like a ghost trapped in a tailored suit. "The Cayman accounts!" Arthur shouted, his voice cracking with sheer terror as he shoved his way violently through the sea of bewildered guests, making a straight line toward Eleanor. "The offshore reserves are hemorrhaging. Tens of millions of dollars are just vanishing. We are locked out of our own mainframes." Without the impenetrable, proprietary firewalls of Aegis Nexus Solutions standing in his way, Marcus Thorne had unleashed the final catastrophic phase of his malware. The digital gates were wide open, and there were no guards left on duty. He was not just stealing. He was systematically liquidating their entire century-old legacy in real time, routing their fortune through untraceable crypto tumblers across the globe. The ballroom, previously a sanctuary of high society composure and whispered gossip, instantly descended into pure, unadulterated panic. The wealthy guests, people who understood exactly what it meant to watch a financial empire bleed out, began physically backing away from Eleanor. They realized with horrifying clarity that the untouchable Vance family was being financially gutted right before their very eyes. The whispers turned into frantic, overlapping shouts. Cell phones were pulled out in a frenzy, not to record my reaction, but to call stockbrokers, wealth managers, and crisis public relations teams. The contagion of absolute ruin was in the air, and nobody wanted to be caught standing too close to the epicenter. Eleanor's arrogant facade did not just crack, it pulverized into dust. The condescending sneer melted from her face, replaced by a ghastly, wide-eyed horror. She stared at the glowing screen of her phone, watching the digital numbers plummet from staggering, generational wealth to absolute zero. I turned on my heel, signaling quietly to Mateo and the federal agents that our work here was finished. We began our slow, deliberate walk toward the grand exit. But Eleanor moved. Stripped entirely of her dignity and her protective armor of money, she lunged forward and physically threw herself into my path. She planted her feet directly in front of the heavy mahogany doors, her hands raised, her entire body trembling violently. Tears, thick and black with ruined designer mascara, streamed down the exact same cheeks she had held so high and mighty just an hour prior. "Please," Eleanor wept, her voice a pathetic, broken gasp that barely sounded human. "Please, Serenity, I am begging you, log back in. Stop him. Stop the bleeding. I will give you anything you want. I will apologize to you in front of everyone. I will get on my knees right here and beg." She was literally gasping for air, her heavy diamond necklaces shaking against her chest as she sobbed. The woman who had slapped me twice, who had called me a parasite and a common criminal, was now begging for my mercy in front of the exact same audience she had used to try and destroy my life. I stopped. I did not step back. I looked down into her tear-streaked, terrified eyes. The freezing calm inside my chest solidified into an unbreakable glacier. "I told you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the unstoppable weight of an absolute decree. "You do not need a glorified tech support girl." "No, please, I was wrong. I was so unbelievably wrong," she sobbed, reaching out her hands as if to grab the fabric of my silk gown. Mateo stepped forward instantly, placing a massive hand firmly on her shoulder and shoving her aside, clearing my path. I looked at her one last time, absorbing the totality of her destruction. "You thought your money made you invincible," I told her, the words slicing cleanly through the chaotic noise of the panicked room. "But arrogance, Eleanor, is the most expensive vulnerability of all. Enjoy the bankruptcy." I did not wait for her reply. I walked past her crumbling, weeping figure and pushed through the grand doors, stepping out into the warm, fragrant Texas night. The heavy, suffocating air of the estate was gone, replaced by the crisp, liberating breeze of freedom. I glanced back over my shoulder one final time. Julian was standing in the exact same spot where I had dropped his ring, completely frozen, uselessly staring at the floor while his mother collapsed into a weeping heap against the marble pillars. He was a silent spectator in his own ruin. Mateo walked closely beside me, the gravel crunching satisfyingly under our shoes as we headed toward the waiting federal vehicles. In the distance, cutting through the serene quiet of the Westlake Hills, the piercing wail of police sirens began to rise. The authorities were approaching rapidly to deal with the monumental financial carnage I had left behind. The Vance empire was burning to the ground, and I did not look back at the flames. Thank you so much to our amazing listeners for tuning in to today's story. We would love to know where in the world you're listening from, so please let us know in the comments. As a reminder, if you enjoyed this journey of justice and want to help keep violent revenge stories alive, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your contribution pays our dedicated staff, helps them feed their families, and ensures we can continue bringing you these incredible stories. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment. Thank you for being the best audience in the world.